let's talk about properties of tessellations. Now, one thing we first need to talk about is what is a tessellation, and that is simply a pattern of shapes that are repeated to fill a plane. So that plane could be a piece of paper, could be a partial piece of paper, could be anything, basically like flat. Okay, so we're going to fill a flat space with repeated shapes. Now, the rules, or the properties, I guess you could say, is that it must fill the entire space, and no shapes can overlap, nor can you leave a gap. So these shapes must be right up next to each other and then fill the entire space. We have two types of tessellations that we're going to talk about. The first type is called a regular tessellation, and those are made up of triangles, squares, or hexagons. You don't need to have all three of these shapes, right? You could have a tessellation that is just squares or just hexagons, but it could also have a combination of these three shapes. And then we have non-regular tessellations, which literally are everything else. So non-regular tessellations contain shapes other than triangles, squares, or hexagons. So let's just look at two examples. This particular example is a regular tessellation. And if you say, well, those don't really look like squares. Well, they are, but they're also 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They're hexagons. And because I'm on a PowerPoint, I can't really show this. But if you look at one of those, it looks like a cube, right? This looks like a three-dimensional shape. And if you just find one cube and trace around, you will notice that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sides on each one of these cubes, which is a hexagon. So you actually, while you're seeing a three-dimensional cube shape, we're dealing with hexagons, which makes it a regular tessellation. And then an example of a non-regular tessellation, right? These are like some arrows with some curvatures, but you'll see that they fill up the entire space that we're looking at. They do not overlap, and they don't leave any gaps. And that's what makes them a tessellation with repeated patterns, non-regular because there are no triangles, hexagons, or squares.